UCLA's first event. We're really excited. We just got the club started this year. My name is Parker Edwards. I'm the president of Turning Point here. And we've been working really hard to get this going, getting approved by the school. And we have some great speakers coming up for you. And without further ado, I'll introduce them. We have Mike, also known as the Black Mike. Next, we have professional skateboarder Johnathan Miranda. And third, you might know him from his YouTube, Slightly Offensive. And last but not least, you might also know from his YouTube, Fuckus Talks, Fuckus. And we're going to be asking them questions. That'll be done by our Vice President, Sarah. And then after
our questions, we're going to do a Q&A. So if you have any questions, keep them in mind, maybe write them down. But we'll start with our first question. So, should free speech be absolute or with limits? Is there any benefit to limiting free speech?
So I just passed it to me. Can you repeat the question? Because
sorry about that. Should free speech be absolute or with limits? Is there any benefit to limiting free speech?
Free speech should not have limits at all unless it's pertaining to calling for violence. If you look at because free speech is a compound word, if you separate each word, free and speech, you look what it really is. The word for free means to not have be under any power or control. It also means to do and act as you wish. Now the word speech means to say your thoughts and expressions with articulate sounds. Also means talks and lectures, as we're doing right now. So if you look at the words by themselves, it means to say whatever you want and to a cloud without any power or government. So it should be ever regulated.
Pretty loud here. Yeah, so I think the idea of should free speech be absolute or should it have limits? When you look at this, you have to look at two things. And number one, it's that free speech doesn't exist. And I mean that while you think about free speech, you go, yeah, it's free, but you forget the cost that it took to allow you that right? This is an absolute life of thousands, even maybe hundreds of thousands, we go up to people who are fighting for the democracy that we now live in, and for us to live in these rights. And you can't take back those lives. And so the cost isn't free, it's already paid in blood. And so when we look at this issue, we can't just look at it as a debate of modernity and what we want or what we're feeling for our times. We have to look at what people from the past did to get us to where we are before we look to the future. And as we look to the future and we try to understand this, we have to realize that we are not nihilists. That when we look at something like free speech, we also put it in a society as great as the United States of America, where we believe in God, where we have morals, values, and virtues, and we expect citizens not to be restricted by the government, but to have self-control, which is the ultimate check to freedom, is your own self-restraint, to be able to use that in the right way. And we hope that those who abuse it are not penalized legally, but that they are basically, they would be learned by their social or societal consequences. And so, yeah, the limits of free speech really should not be there legally, per se. They should be understood in a society. That's why we need God, we need values, and we need morals to this day.
That works? All right, that works. To add to that, I think when it comes to censorship, we're seeing a lot of it is coming from the left and from the tech companies, which is ultimately the left as well. And I think that their heart is in the right place in that they're trying to rid the world of hate. They're trying to rid the world of things they deem hateful and not beneficial to, a good society or good culture. But in reality, once you start pushing people to the shadows, in a backwards way, you actually gain them more support. So if the KKK were to come to UCLA and give a speech, not many people would show up. Not many people would hear their ideas and say, oh, that's pretty good, I want to get involved. It wouldn't work. But because the free speech, because it's a free market, people would be able to hear their ideas and decide for themselves. But once you push people away and say, oh, these ideas are too hateful, these people can't speak on campus, now you're pushing people to the shadows. And now that's why we're seeing now, it's because everyone's looking around for the next racist, next white supremacist, and it's because people aren't hearing enough ideas. So if we keep pushing people away, we're actually going to gain them support just by people joining their side who appreciate free speech and think free speech should be everywhere. And in reality, if we actually did a free market and actually listened to people and heard them out, the free market would solve itself, and there would be, less and less hatred out in the world every day.
Yeah, so it's very interesting because when people ask you that question, I guess people on the left, they say we should regulate free speech, hate speech shouldn't be allowed. And it's just ironic because usually I tell them when you want to censor speech, free speech, or whatever you want to call it, hate speech, who are the people who are affected by that the most? And it's usually people who are less privileged or underprivileged or minorities specifically. So examples we have is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested for praying on the steps of City Hall in Albany, Georgia. There are how many African-American literature is censored right now? The autobiography of Malcolm X. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So you look at these situations, let's say specifically in the Black community, when you have certain speeches censored or regulated, they are the people who aren't receiving certain information because of it, and it actually hurts them. So when you tell them that, oh, okay, conservative speech is hate speech, that means that you're not going to have conservative ideas being regulated towards minority communities. That means they're never going to understand that, big government is bad. So I always tell people, oh, you're actually conservative, you just don't know it. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I try to explain to them, it's like, do you want the government to take your guns? No. Do you want less taxes? Yes. Do you want bigger government? No. You're conservative. But they think they're liberal because they're only getting one narrative. So that's my explanation.
What's the scariest or crazy experience that you had interviewing people or just generally standing up for what you believe in?
I think the craziest thing for me, I'm probably nothing compared to Elijah, but for me, Elijah's king of this here. For me personally, being called a white supremacist and being spat on at Trump's Star on MAGA Day. Wow. The same day he actually interviewed me, asking me, "Are you a racist?" So that was actually a great day for that. That's the worst for me, being called the coconut, being called anything in the book. So it's nothing new. But to me, I've been getting death threats from Antifa. I've gotten it from people in the punk scene, like, "Oh, you're nothing but a poser. How can you be for Trump?" And I'm like, "We're about anarchy, yet you vote for Bernie Sanders and socialism. Who's the bigger dumbass here?" It's like, in a way. So for me, that's as far as it got with me. That's my answer.
I think it's one of my first experiences doing this whole YouTube thing. Elijah knows. We went to Maxine Waters' office, and there were some Black Panthers there, and they're protesting. And it was just ironic because I'm over here filming Elijah, and he's trying to ask questions, and then people are like, "Oh, what are you doing here? You can't be here." And then he's like, "What do you mean? We're journalists. We're trying to find the truth." And then they start surrounding Elijah, and people always ask me if I ever felt like I was in danger. I didn't feel like I was in danger, but I felt like Elijah was in danger, and I was like, I'm gonna, come out of this unscathed. Like, he's probably gonna die, but I don't think I should stop filming because I should get on camera. So, they start spitting on him, punching him on the side, and he just like runs away. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm here, like with the camera. And if it wasn't for this other Black pastor, I think he was a Black pastor, right, Elijah? That
not a Black Panther.
Black pastor.
Black pastor's different.
But yeah, they start swarming, chasing him, and this random guy in a car pulled over. Elijah got in it and drove away. And they would have kept driving if Elijah didn't tell them. He's like, "No, my camera guy. So then they stopped for me. The guy had a bunch of crap in his car, so I literally had to like jump inside it. But that was a very, very interesting experience because I wasn't afraid, but I could feel Elijah's fear seeping from his pores.
Yeah, and on that, there's always like some 42-year-old like single loser in his basement that writes like, you little something that rhymes with itch, why'd you run away? And I'm thinking, like 20 gangster-looking guys running at you with a bat and they're spitting on you and they're saying they're going to kill you. You can take the 20 guys. I'm not going to try to do it. And I think that's where, when you think about like fear involved with this, right? Every one of us in this room encounters some level of intimidation or fear based off of your beliefs. And even if there's liberals in this room, you know that there are certain areas and places where you don't feel safe to share what you think. Not because it's directly going to harm someone, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because there's a narrative in this world that is painted, especially those that are conservative, that you are the enemy of the people, and that you are trying to reinstate things that are the blights of what made this country, I would say the darkness, like slavery or racism or homophobia, and you're just trying to fight for a better country. And so when you walk into rooms, think about it, a lot of people say, well, why don't you try to bridge the gap between liberals and conservatives? And that's a lot of what we do, is go into liberal echo chambers to talk to them. But those echo chambers, sometimes you think only your voice is going to echo back, but you put out your voice and they put out their fists. And so I think that fear comes on two levels. Number one, I think it got real for me when I realized that people had doxed my parents' home and they had put pictures of their address saying where my parents had lived online. And I realized that your choices don't only affect you, but they affect your family. But that shouldn't surprise you, because what your choices that you're making are here to affect the country. And so sometimes I even had to move away or move locations just for their safety. But on a physical level, I think that not getting hit, not getting punched is what really scared me. I think it was when an unmarked officer came up to me in the middle of a protest, said, look, we got squad cars coming, you need to stay calm. There's a hit on your head here. This is whatever, like literally right here, we have gangs that are here, you're around, we're giving a full escort out, you need to stay still, you need to stay with me, and you need to wait to move. And I just stood there, and then boom, out of the middle of nowhere, 10 officers come, create a line and a barricade around, they create a huddle, people start running at us, we get 4 different police motorcycles driving on the sidewalk, and a squad car on the side, and from that day forward, he said, if you ever come to these big protests like this, fully fledged marking your flag, you need to call the lieutenant and you need to get a squad car to join you before you try to interview people. And I realized that the danger that we all face is that very thing. I just happen to see the front of it. But I love you guys, and I appreciate you guys being bold and standing up in spite of the dangers of violence, of social suicide, of workplace threats. And we're just doing what you're doing, but we're doing it on camera, so we're all in this together.
Got a little close. I actually haven't had anything that bad. Tough act to follow, Elijah. One time a guy pulled out a knife, but he was just showing it to me. He was like swinging it around. He kind of poked me with it by accident, but it was fine. But adding on to what Elijah said, he's right. For too long, we've been the silent majority. That's kind of what they call us, the silent majority. And because we're afraid of the violence or the backlash or the social backlash, we kind of stay quiet and stay polite and don't really push the button that much. I think we have to stop doing that now, because the more and more we do that, the more we forfeit the narrative to the fake news, the mainstream media. So if we don't speak up and they, kind of cover a story and they put their spin on it, that's going to be the reality. And if we keep giving those up and keep giving them up, they're going to control the whole narrative, and they're going to basically control the culture going forward. So in the past, I think it was really hard to step up and speak your mind. Now I think it's easier than it has been. And with organizations like Turning Point and PragerU and how accessible all the influencer type people are, I think now's the time to kind of step up and take a stand. And if you do face issues, reach out to us, reach out to Turning Point. There are resources for you, but if you don't, it's going to be an ugly, ugly future for the United States.
How do you respond to people who have unreasonable bias?
Out of my head and see. Very cool.
I think a perfect example of unreasonable bias, if you guys saw the video where me and Elijah were at, I think OCC, and that the liberal black chick who was telling Elijah that, what was it? The reverse rape.
Well, it was time for white men to be quiet and to step back and to listen, and that's how you have a conversation. And I said, well, that's not conversation, that's just listening. And she said that we've been racist for too long, so we should step back. This is where I introduced this guy. She didn't know he was a black guy.
Luckily his black cameraman was there, ready to save the day. He just switched off, and then she's like, "Oh, your token." And I was like, I love that word. I mean, tokens are gold, right? They make you feel special. But unreasonable bias like that, I think when you meet people like that, there's 2 things you have to do or can do. Either just stop talking to them, or they'll stop talking to you. Like she, real quick after she stopped, she didn't want to talk to me. Or turn it on them. So it's like beating the left of their own game. So she was like, telling Elijah that he's racist for being white and he needs to shut up and just listen. And then she begins her next narrative by calling me a token. I said, wow, that's very racist of you. You know, so turning it back on her. So she's like, she doesn't think she's in the wrong whatsoever by what she said to Elijah, but then she calls me a token black guy. I'm like, oh wow, I didn't know you were a racist. I didn't know you had such, ill things in your heart. And she just looks at me and like, what do you mean? Like, well, no. It's like, so you believe in reverse racism? It's like, no, it's just racism. That's what you are. Because you're calling me a token. You're saying very derogatory terms to me. Things like house Negro. Do you know what that means? If you don't understand what a house Negro means and you have the gal to call another black person that, that's pretty racist. And that's when she immediately ended the conversation. So people who have unreasonable bias, they're not gonna want to talk to you. They're not. So that's why for me, I just like to just put it on their heads and just, make a public display of them.
I think for me, what becomes unreasonable bias is like that saying, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. You can take a person to knowledge, but you can't make them think it. And a lot of people tend to go to that area where we're seeing now facts versus feelings. You trust what you feel, and that's kind of very annoying most of the time. But for me, before I got into politics, I was really, as a pastor in a way, I wanted to do that. So I've debated atheists before, and you kind of find their weak spots. Like, do you believe in no absolutes? No. Are you absolute about it? Yeah. You just kind of debunk yourself. But the most biased to me was my own family in a way, where I would talk to my cousin, and we had a debate about cops and blacks being killed, and even though there's more majority of white people getting shot by cops, we were talking about it, and she was saying pretty much like, well, you don't know what it's like to be a minority. We're cousins. Like, I'm Hispanic, I became white, and all of a sudden. But it showed like, well, what's your evidence and facts? I don't want to talk about it anymore. And in a way, you can't really argue with people. It's impossible. It's pretty much like, everyone watches Mean Girls. You know that saying, like, he's too gay to function? People are too stupid to function. Like, they just have no idea everything. So unbiased, unreasonable bias is unreasonable in itself.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's kind of hard to follow up, but the truth is if you live in California, okay, you live in a culture that's seated in unreasonable bias. So everybody mostly that you confront, whether it's in your workplace or your family, you have some level of an inability to reason with them simply because their worldview does not allow for the truths that to hold themselves to be evident, right? And so these people that you're talking to and you're confronting, we got to ask ourselves with limited energy, where do we actually focus our time? Where do we focus our arguments? And I don't think that it is trying to deal with people who are unreasonable. I think it's more important to be able to recognize it, to see it, and just to learn how to handle each situation as it is. Because the Bible, even if you don't trust in it, has a very interesting verse. And it's important for all of us because sometimes we want to be accepted by the people closest to us. We want them to see our change. We want them to accept our growth. We want them to love our liberation and the way we've been moving. But it says that a prophet, right, somebody who even might have heard from God, will never be accepted in his own home. Meaning that the people that know you, that grew up with you, that are around your workplace, they see you and they don't want to hear from you. They don't want to talk to you. So don't waste your energy talking to people. And I don't either. If I can see someone doesn't want to know, that's not the one I'm trying to win. I'm trying to win the one who's questioning, who's trying to understand, the one who might even teach me something. Believe it or not, you can learn from people too. So when you walk up to these people, you got to ask yourself that question. If this person is unreasonable, then they don't deserve your time. Save your time for the people that can be won, because that's where the battle is. That's where you're going to be most effective. And just realize that there's a national narrative out there. Sometimes people don't even know they're being unreasonable. And so by being that person, compassionate, understanding, realistic, that saying goes right, if you win the argument but lose the person, you've lost everything. So the idea is you're not here to just win. You're here to convince and be a light of truth and to change a culture. Never forget that happens one person at a time, and we're all involved in that.
Adding to that, with my channel, I've kind of realized exactly what Elijah said. And when I go to the protests and talk to the protesters, I'm probably not going to convince Antifa to like Trump. It's fine. I'm probably not going to convince like the triggered leftists to come around and see the value of free market capitalism, stuff like that. But what we can control is how we interact with the people. So if we're rational, we're calm, and we're delivering facts, it's not so much about convincing the far left progressive person to come to the right. It's going to be convincing the apolitical people in the middle who are watching. So I think that's where the battle is going to be about going forward. It's not going to be about convincing Antifa to like Trump. It's going to be about convincing people who were previously not engaged in politics to get involved and realize the importance of politics. It's not going away. And it's basically a matter of just kind of how you carry yourself. Always be polite, always be rational, always be respectful. So when they get triggered and they get loud, maybe the people watching will say, I don't know my politics, I don't know what I am, but I'm definitely not what that is. And once you do that, and once they say I'm not part of the mob will abandon them because they're not progressive enough. Once the mob abandons them, they're going to need a more appealing culture and society and community to be involved in. So that's kind of where we come in, all of us come in. It's going to be about the interpersonal, the interactions, and it's going to be about just being rational, calm, and respectful, just so people naturally want to side with you.
In 2014, CNN named Klaas Rolodius the Journalist of the Year and Print Journalist of the Year. In December 2018, he resigned his role after the organization found he falsified articles on a grand scale and even invented characters, deceiving both readers and his colleagues. Rolodius later confessed that he made up material in at least 14 articles since 2011. How do we distinguish real news from fake news?
Well, first off, he should probably get the award because it's fake news. So I'm surprised that he got away with that. In all honesty, it is just doing your own research. Most of the time, we tend to look at a certain, whether you're left or whether you're right, I don't know if anyone's in between or whatever, we tend to just look at one and think it's unbiased. Like, oh, you look at Fox, that's totally true. Now we're seeing sometimes it goes to the left. And then we look, if you do, CNN, and then you realize you have to do your full-on research. Look at the subject at hand. I think the best person who actually, or the best people who actually give real news are the three other guys right here. Like, these guys probably give you the real, unfabricated, unfiltered news possible. And that's the only way you know that is because you do your research. Most people don't do their research, they just trust it. Sadly, as a Latino and a minority, a lot of them just trust Univision or just trust Telemundo, because why would the news lie to them? There's no reason to do that. But as we're seeing now, especially 90% of the media is owned by 6 corporations. If you don't think that there's no profit in this, then you're horribly mistaken. You need to do your own research. I know it takes effort and time, but literally your minds are what make this country great. If they're stupid, sadly, you're gonna vote for stupid people. Hence the left exists, and so on and so forth. But in order to know the difference between real news and fake news, you just have to do your research and deep dig down.
Yeah, well, so to kind of add to that, kind of understanding fake news, I think you have to realize that fake news, what Johnathan was saying, has a purpose, and it's to turn profits. And we got to understand here that fake news does its job, no matter whether it's figured out and people shed light on it or not, because damage is done, and that's what they're looking to do, is to inflict damage or to support a narrative using something that may or may not be true. Now, because of intellectual integrity, these communication or networks, as some people might still call them, will still come out and make corrections to their false narratives or fake news. But again, you can't undo what's already happened. And if you notice, a trend on Twitter is that the fake news will get tens of thousands of retweets, and then the corrections for the fake news will get like 72. And so they understand that they have a certain level of ability for that day or two to kind of release the story as they see it. And then as long as they pull back a day or two later, then nobody can accuse them of anything. And so what they're doing is they're taking information initially in initial reports, they're spinning them the way they want to, they're getting the effect that they desire, and it's working to change our culture. So I think as an individual, it's important that when you're talking about news, even if it's from a site you trust, you need to wait some things out before you jump to a conclusion on them. We all know that even with 9/11, people don't fully know all the sides, all the stories, what exactly happened, right? That's what the US made a mistake. It was like, we used an opportunity, there was an invasion, boom, terrorists, let's go invade Afghanistan, boom, there's weapons of mass destruction, let's invade Iraq. And here we are in a long-standing war in the Middle East that we haven't been able to figure out why, because as a country, we reacted on news before we knew all the facts. Turns out there was no weapons of mass destruction inside of Iraq, but we were fed it, we swallowed it up, and that was mostly conservatives who got in that line. So we're to blame as well. And we believed our government, but like I would say, don't trust the government. Even if you love Trump, you don't trust the government, okay? Because you gotta realize that the government is not to be trusted. They should be feared and respected because they have power, but remember that the power can be taken from them and we can take it from them. Amen. And the media is the same way. If we're so quick to say that, with the government, we can take the power back from the media. And what is it? It's exactly why HuffPost and BuzzFeed had to lay off their opinion editors. It's because people don't want their opinions. And until the rest of the country sees that most of the major news network narratives are just that. They're just opinion pieces. They're just rhetoric and narratives being sold to the public as news. The sooner these companies will be out of business. I think CNN will be gone within 10 years. I pray to God they will. And I pray that Fox News would also learn a thing or two and they would start getting more accurate and stop doing the same thing for the right as well.
Yes, I'm totally on board with everything they said. And when it comes to the fake news, it's going to be about deciding what's narrative and what's reality. There's always going to be the narrative. We know the story they want to tell. We saw it with the Covington High School kids. You know, how quickly did everyone jump on, both sides jump onto the bandwagon and disavow those kids and what they did? Then you take a step back and you're like, boy, they kind of just stood there and smiled and there was a guy hitting a drum in their face. And we like forget what side we're on and forget what really happened.
Black lives matter. Black trans lives matter. This is fascism. You're all fascists.
This is fascism.
Fuck you all.
Fuck all you fools.
You're welcome in here. Hey, we welcome you here. We're not fascists. We want come here. We welcome you in here. You're welcome. You're welcome. Share your thoughts. Well, you have to have a foghorn first to speak. No veterans here. Got a PTSD triggering. Sorry, apologize. Yeah, Black lives do matter. The ones that don't. Hey, Mike. Hey guys, we have an announcement. Mike, just to let you know, Black Lives Matter, right?
Thank you. I mean, that was very strange. That wasn't even the topic of the conversation. So
Let's move on.
So this is
Next question.
Yeah, next question.
good thing they farted before they left. So this actually ties into the question, to the conversation.
Is that a stink bomb?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, this is not the first time. This is okay. Hold on. This is not the first time. There was an Antifa guy, right? Because like, there's nothing more mature than to use stink bombs. This is the new attack. He stuck a stink bomb in my sweater, in my hood, and it smelled, and I couldn't figure out why it smelled like I had crapped my pants. And everywhere I was interviewing people would be like talking to me like, and this guy comes in, he's like, dude, I think you put a stink bomb in your hood.
Very much a stink bomb.
Yeah. So check that out on his. That's on his. What's that? Cal State Long Beach video. Yeah, they use a stink bomb tag. This is a new left right here. So be afraid, guys.
So yeah, I mean, it actually ties into what we're talking about, because mainstream media news, it's not news, it's narrative. So what's happening is that you have all these mainstream outlets from left to right, CNN and Fox News, that put out specific narratives. You know, when Don Lemon goes on this TV show, even when Tucker Carlson goes on his show, they're promoting a narrative. And if you want to know the news, you actually have to find out what isn't being told. So you have to find out what the narrative is, and then say, okay, what isn't being said, and then find that out, and you'll actually have the news. That's as far as it goes with the mainstream media. So, and it goes back to censorship and free speech and whatnot. When you have one specific narrative always being pushed, you have people, minorities, those two individuals, minorities, not receiving news because they're only getting one narrative. So they're being told that Trump is racist. They're being told that, Black lives don't matter. They're being told, that, I as a Black man, I'm just being terrorized on the streets wherever I go. Like I don't have rest. White people just harass me, all day, every day. I can't get into school. I don't have an education. I don't have ID. So that's what's being told to them, but they're not looking for what the narrative isn't. So then they react that way. Black Lives Matter. You're all fascists. We weren't even talking about Black Lives Matter. So it's but they're being told that conservatives are racist, misogynistic, bigoted, homophobic, trans hating, whatever. But they're not being told that. Have you ever met a trans conservative? I have, we have, I know a gay Black conservative, so it's like, but they're being told that that's not the case. So when it comes to the mainstream media, that individual that you talked about, he was fired for, putting out false stories. Believe it or not, most journalists, they're not actually waking up in the day saying, okay, how can I produce fake news? Fake news is a byproduct. It's not the initial what they're trying to do. It's a byproduct, and it's a byproduct because of the culture of the news. Like I was saying, it's narrative, not news, and that's why when Trump says things like, "Oh, the media is the enemy of the people," they get offended because that's not their intention. But again, we know the road to hell is paved with good intentions. For me, as a journalist, I agree. I say, if I put out something that's false, that could hurt communities and can make them think and believe a lie, in that moment, I become the enemy of the people. It doesn't mean that I'm some hateful person that just wants to tell lies. It means that I'm flawed, and I recognize my flaws. And if someone calls me out on it, I want to correct it. But then you see journalists say, "Oh, we're not the enemy of the people." Well, if you're not the enemy, what are you? Are you the hero of the people? That's not what journalism is. You're not a hero. You're not an advocate, but you think you are. So there's people like this, like Jim Acosta, who walks around like he's an advocate and he's the hero of the people. No, you're not. You're just a guy with a microphone who's supposed to do his job. Stop trying to, get attention. And that's the thing that journalism has right now. You have these people trying to be advocates. They're trying to be heroes. Like, we're going to stop Trump. We're going to defeat him today. And that's why we see these examples with the Covington kids, the Chipotle worker who was fired for racism, but more information came out and it wasn't racism. I was a manager at a restaurant. I would have done the same thing. I'm sorry. There are Black people who come in all the time when I was working and they did stupid stuff. I told them to leave. That wasn't racist. You're just being stupid. So it's things like that where if we're not able to recognize what the actual narrative is, then we're just going to believe the lie, which those two idiots did.
Actually asserting that the media is convincing Black people that there's racism in this country?
No, that's not what I said.
Is that what you're saying?
I said
Are
that.
you denying that racism?
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. That's not what I said. I'll explain what I said.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the.
No, I'll answer. I want to answer. So when I say things like Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested for praying on the steps of the City Hall in Albany, Georgia. So when you have people, the mainstream media say MLK is producing hate, he should be censored, arrest him. All he was doing was praying because he had a narrative that was contrary to what the public had. So what I'm saying is that the mainstream media is not telling people that people know racism exists. What they're saying is that they're only producing one narrative, that me as a Black man, we as Black men, our existence is in danger simply because we're Black. When that's not always, no, it's not. That's a narrative. That's a narrative. It's not a fact. It's a narrative. There's different. So narrative involves certain facts, but it's not in itself fact. It's a narrative. So there's other narratives that you have to be willing to talk to more people
again,
and get
racism. You say anti-Black racism doesn't exist in this country. People aren't attacked.
Again, that's not what I said. Again, that's not what I said.
Black in this country.
Again,
you
that's
say
not what
that
I
doesn't
said.
happen.
I didn't say that.
But the thing is, this might be the thing. if we label everything racist so quickly like they do in the media, it actually marginalizes the victims of real racism. And if everything's racist and then you find out a couple days later, oh, actually they didn't say that, or actually that's not exactly what happened, then actual people who are victims of racism pretty much go unnoticed. And the media's narrative is what's pushing this. Every single thing is, oh, is it racist? Did Trump say it's because he's racist? Are the Covington kids racist? Everything's about racism, and it's actually not helping people who are actually victims. That's what we're saying. And
So it's like,
and if the media jumps so quick, everything's got to be racist right away, and then ends up not being. And then it's like, why are they trying to divide us so bad? Why do they want us Black against white, men against women, gay against straight? That's what we keep getting from the media. And it's not because there's actual problems. There are problems. But if we treat everything like it's a major problem, it's not going to solve anything. And it's going to take the attention off the people who deserve the attention, which is the 1% of the 1%, the corporate interests, the tech overlords. These are the people who are actually dividing us. And they want us pitted against each other. So it's like, there is racism. I'm with you. Yes, racism exists. But it's not around every corner. It's not everywhere. It's not in this room right now. Up here, at least. I don't know. But it's not. And that the lie being told by the media is actually what's keeping us divided. It's our opinion, my opinion.
Right, and I was going to say that's kind of piggyback on that end, and that's why I think it bothers a lot of conservatives, is because the argument of whether racism is real or not is not the argument. People know that there are racists, but then if we actually acknowledge that, if you say a problem, conservatives want to find the solution, and so we're going to try to find the solution to racism, calling people who aren't racist just because they're in a situation that's spun that way, takes the eyes off of things that matter. Like, why is there low funding for inner city schools? Why is it that there's so many single mothers raising black children? Why are the men not present in the families? That's an issue. I want to.
Locked up because they black.
Well, let's talk about it. Yeah, but why are they locked up? I want to talk about exactly. I want to talk about those issues.
In black neighborhoods, like going on right now, where they're just scooping up black men.
That's not on the news. See, but that's not on the news. What we're seeing is a kid in a hat smiling in the face of a left-wing activist, and they're saying that that's the biggest form of racism in this country. Well, what you're saying, every single word you said is more important than a single second of that story. But you're not getting any airtime, and these are not there. Why? Because the media doesn't care about black people.
Like you,
they don't want to help black people.
Have the airtime aren't addressing these things either.
We fully are addressing. We work together. We confront these issues. We talk to people. We go out to find out what's happening, and that's the key. So that's why they don't like us. YouTube censors us because they don't like what we have to say.
Find out what's happening when you see every day black men being gunned down for no good reason at all. Black men being beat and killed and arrested.
So again, it goes back
What do you need to find out?
Again, it goes back to narrative. It's narrative.
Police violence, mass incarceration.
No, the biggest issue within the black community is the single motherhood rate. It's 70%. It's also abortion. More black babies are aborted than are born. The black community is the only community where the population is stagnant. We're 12%.
That's not
yet
correct.
we make
You're incorrect.
no, it's
I'm actually
okay, we're gonna have to move on. We're short
This is
on
my
time.
subject. I studied it. We are the only group in America that grows by natural increase. The African American population is the only group in America that grows by natural increase.
Can you continue this conversation after? We only have this room for a few more minutes.
We'll talk some more afterwards.
Those are facts.
We'll talk some more.
Those are facts.
We'll talk some more afterwards.
Real talk. Get your facts straight.
We'll talk some more.
You don't talk about facts.
Get some facts
Okay,
straight.
let's move on to the next question. In the Supreme
Need
Court,
more education.
okay, thank you. In the Supreme Court case, Brandenburg versus Ohio established the imminent lawless action test to determine when speech was protected under the First Amendment, and if it can be lawfully restricted. In Brandenburg, the court held that the hate speech is protected under the First Amendment as long as it does not provoke violence. Do you guys agree with this?
I agree with that. Hate speech doesn't exist based on perspective. Hate is something that you base on. Like, so what you think is offensive, I can think is funny. And the moment with hate speech, the moment you make it an adjective, it could go to something else. Like we have Pastor Greg Laurie who can say something and that comes out as offensive. But it's on the subject, like he was saying earlier, when Black lives say, I'm gonna kill pigs and I think coming on bacon, that's hate speech. That's putting violence on black cops. And going back to you, sorry, I'm going back on that. You're saying about pretty much like black people are getting incarcerated. What about black people killing people with black people? How come we're having so much violence within our own within your own color and within also minorities as well?
This is an easy question to answer. This is an easy question to answer.
Would you like to hear or would you like to talk?
You asked the question.
I'm actually
You asked the question. You ready to hear the answer to that question?
Real quick, brother.
Because I have answers to that
okay, so
question.
you're going to talk about stuff like that. How come Obama wasn't there for black people? How come all these people were getting arrested?
Which
How come
question
Obama
you want to
wasn't
answer
there for
first? Just let me know when you finish answering the
All right,
question.
let me ask you more then. Since you seem to be very impatient.
Can we go back to the prompt? Sorry.
I got answers for all of that.
This is so much fun. All right.
Which one you want first?
Black on black crime versus white on black.
So again, the majority of white victims of crime in this country have white perpetrators. The majority of black victims of crime in this country have black perpetrators. The majority of any ethnic group is going to have the perpetrators of the victims of crime will be the perpetrators of the crime will be the same ethnicity as the victims. That's a normal thing. That's normal in every society, just about every society in the world. So to make that an excuse for racist violence against black people is purely and entirely disingenuous.
If it's 50% of the population, make it 53% of the murders.
Exactly.
How does that happen?
Okay, can we move back to the prompt? I'm sorry, you guys can have this conversation after. We only have limited time.
In every society,
I'm sorry, can you hold this for
the vast
after?
majority of crimes.
All right, we're moving on to the next prompt.
Are committed by people who are poor.
We can talk more
So people who have been structurally
You can talk to
denied
after.
economic opportunity and
Okay.
are more poor are going to commit more crime. It's as simple as
What's the next
that.
question?
Can you?
Alright.
Okay.
What other questions you got?
I got
Okay.
more.
Hey.
We can talk to you after.
Hey,
Just
I'm
sorry, wrap it. Okay, let's wrap it up. All right, cool.
The other thing.
Okay, can you please continue this conversation after? We only have this room for a limited amount of
Black
time.
people kill black people, those black people go to prison. When white folks kill black folks,
Excuse me, can you
those
please
white folks
stop?
go home.
Sir,
That's the problem.
sir,
That's why it's a big
I am
issue.
perfectly glad to have
That's
a
why it's a big
continued
issue.
conversation with you
And people
afterwards.
like this,
Let's be respectful.
always been
Let's be
in
respectful.
existence.
Let's be respectful.
There's
to
always
the time
been-
that they have right now.
from the
Come on,
beginning
man.
of the racist project in this
Really,
country
go ahead.
and elsewhere,
Can you have
There's
democracy
always
without
been
freedom of speech?
those Negroes
Okay.
who have helped white supremacists to oppress black people.
So you're,
It was people like this.
come on, man, come on.
It was black folks working for white supremacists who went and captured black folks in Africa
are you happy?
and
about-
sold them to
Can we
white
finish
white
all the
folks.
questions
It
and
was
then you
black
can
folks
talk?
like this who told on black folks who were trying to get their freedom from slavery. It's always been Negro. Don't let a Negro convince you
Come on,
that
man.
black folks
The
are not
topic is
aware of
free
your
speech.
racism.
It's not racism.
Yeah.
Next question. You've set it up.
Okay. Can you have democracy without freedom of speech?
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so first of all, we have to realize that a democracy is important to look at. First of all, like what kind of democracy are we here? We're not a traditional democracy, meaning it's not that we live in a society where the majority of people make the laws. Obviously, the Electoral College is a good example of that, right? We have limitations on running a democracy because then you end up having mob rule. And so you end up having a position where if you have enough crazy people trying to fight for something, it becomes the law, and that is not good. Okay, the same thing goes with free speech. Yes, you can have a democracy without free speech, because if 51% of the people don't want free speech, then you won't have it, right? But we understand that in our republic, the idea where we are trying to fight for a government and in a society where we elect people to represent us, they're representatives, we need to have a voice so that those representatives can be chosen correctly. If you're going to call yourself a representative, then you better represent the people that are your constituents. And how can you represent them if they're not able to freely speak up and say what they want? And that's kind of the problem in our democracy today, is certain narratives, especially conservative narratives, when you want to try to say things, it's being said in no matter what district you're in, that those are racist, that those are bad, and that we're going to only put on blast left-wing or Democrat type of narratives, which means that those are the ones that are right. Democrat ideas and left-wing ideas have become the mainstream pop culture. It's become what's accepted on MTV and kids shows and different stations, as this is just normal, right? If you don't think trans woman is a real woman, then you are hateful, then you are homophobic, then you are this. And that's a narrative, like Mike was saying. That's not necessarily truth. That's just a narrative, and if you don't apply to that narrative, then you're considered somebody who shouldn't have a voice in election. You shouldn't have a voice in the global conversation or in the national conversation. So yeah, I mean, free speech is important, but we have to understand that in a democracy, since we aren't technically a traditional democracy and we're a republic, I don't think our free speech will be infringed. It's not only important, it's necessary, and it's going to continue because of our rights.
I think you can't have a functioning government if you don't have free speech flourishing in that country. Because what happens is that the government provides an opportunity for the people to voice their concerns, their opinions. But if you have a government stifling that speech, you're not going to know how to perfectly or to the best of their abilities serve those people. So when you have things like the DNC and the RNC controlling who becomes president, in 2016 bringing us Hillary and Trump, no other options. That was it. Anyone else who wanted to run for president, they didn't give them a platform. They didn't invite them to any debates. They're controlling a narrative, saying that we want Hillary. You either get Hillary or you get Trump. That was it. No one wanted that situation. No, there weren't a bunch of conservatives just sitting around saying, well, 2016, let's throw in Donald Trump. That's what we're gonna do. No, that was the circumstance that happened because he ran under as a Republican candidate. But you have those two examples. But then even look at previous presidencies elections. When John McCain was running or Mitt Romney was running, they treated them the same way they treated Trump when he was running. He's a racist, misogynistic. Biden's going around saying that Republicans want to put black people back in chains. Like that is a very specific narrative. You want to put Black people back in chains. Like, what does that mean? Like, what policy are you going to, like, how would you do that? Like, in a society that condemns racism, you know,
they're actually doing
so much.
There's more people in prisons
so
in this country
it's
than there ever was slaves in this country.
Sir, are you
Think about that.
Sir,
There are more people.
Just ignore him, man. Just ignore him.
Okay, let's continue the prompt. You can continue this after.
Just ignore him. Just ignore
Sir,
him.
are you an adult? Are you an adult?
Just
How old are you?
ignore
Are you an
him,
adult?
man. Just
How old are you? How
There are
old are
more
you?
people
How old are
Don't
you?
in
engage
prison
him,
Are you an
in this
adult or are
country
you a
right now
child?
than there ever was slaves in this country prior to the Civil War.
See,
So this is the end
so
of
now
free
what's going to
speech.
happen is that we can
So
no
this is
longer
the
have a
example of
conversation
your free speech.
because you're
Here is
disrupting.
the example of your free
We
speech.
can no longer have a
You can only
conversation.
be free speech.
I'm sure if you got up nicely right now, it would be an issue. You
So
got up right now,
you're
nicely, it's
saying
not an issue.
I don't have free speech?
You're now going to be
You're
escorted
saying
out.
I don't have a right to free speech? This is your free speech. So just like you talking about other people, preventing you from having free speech, this is what's going on right now. Let's see the end of free speech right
You
now.
guys,
How much
you guys
free
stop
speech do
believing
you
it. Stop
actually
believing
believe
it.
in?
You guys stop talking.
How much free speech do you actually believe in? This is the lie. This
Excuse me, sir. Can you please
illustrates
leave?
the lie
Sir, can you please
of
leave?
your whole the whole
Excuse me,
premise
sir. Can you
of
please
your
leave?
talk. This right
We
here
asked you to stay
illustrates how
quiet
much of a lie that
so we
is.
can talk, and you don't want to do that.
This
So can
illustrates
you
how
please
much of
leave?
a lie that is.
Stop voting Democrats, stop voting
Now
Democrats.
what?
That's his bag.
That's his bag.
Thank you.
He has his bag.
His bag is still there. That's his bag right there.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Right here, that's how this guy spins these stories. I'm not gonna spit anything, man.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, can you have democracy without freedom of speech?
I think right now, especially in America, it is a constitutional republic, it isn't a democracy. What we're seeing right now is, honestly, freedom of speech allows both sides to speak their mind. There's actually a quote saying, I don't know who it is, but he's saying, I would die for someone, even if they say something offensive I don't agree with, I would die for their right to say that. And for us right now, I'm giving our freedom of speech, and even though right now we're seeing, you can't have the country as it is if you censor one side. Because the moment you do that, then you have a green light to censor the other side. But you can't have a republic or a constitutional republic without it. Because you look at the First Amendment, it talks about freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of protest. And the moment you censor that, it censors your freedom of religion, your freedom to protest, and your freedom to everything else. So we have to look at it as, if you actually censor freedom of speech, you're actually literally censoring your entire livelihood.
Okay. What advice do you have for students at liberal schools?
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy one. Just when the typical image of a radical liberal, or I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when I engage with certain individuals from the Black race, I like to call them, uppity radical Blacks, like that gentleman was right there. Just be nice, be kind. I've had very horrible conversations with members of the Black community, and I've had very great conversations with members of the Black community. And that goes back to your question about unreasonable bias. That gentleman had an unreasonable bias, so it was impossible to talk to him. There are people who I've sat down and have conversations with, whether they're Black or whatever, and I've given them, statistics, facts, talked to them, and they listened. They listened to me because, I had a very opening, warm presence. I wasn't there to try to bash them. I was going to say, hey, let's have a conversation. And that's why I personally don't like protests and marches, because people are there just to scream and yell, not to necessarily have a conversation. And if you approach people, and it's funny because we live in a day and age now where it seems like it's impossible to just be friends with someone who thinks differently than you, but people do it all the time. Like if you have a job, you work with people who have all sorts of ideas in their head. You just don't know it because you're not necessarily talking about it. You're at work, you're flipping patties or something like that. But it's possible to work with people and to be friends with people who think differently than you. You just have to be better, be a better person, be kind, be loving. You're not there to, oh, gotcha. It's hey, let's have a conversation. I just want to ask you this question, or I don't necessarily understand this about maybe if they're a minority, they're Hispanic and you're white. Ask them a question. Say, hey, what does this mean in your culture? Ask them a question and then go back and forth and just talk to them. If you can't do that as a conservative, then you're already lost about it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I guess how to handle being in a liberal school is, the first thing is, there's actually a saying that don't argue with a stupid person. They'll bring you down to their level, and beat you with experience. So not pretty much. Parker?
He's the president. He was out there.
He was outside.
Parker, that's Spider-Man guy. But when it comes to handling liberal schools, actually something he said earlier, that a pastor has no home in where he's from. He just has no respect where he speaks. For us as conservatives, or even as libertarians or independents, wherever you are in this room, your job honestly is to be, there's a parable in the Bible that says the parable of the sower. You just plant a seed. That's all you do. You just give facts, you let them think, and then they water it on themselves if they choose to. So when you handle liberal schools, you have a conversation. The goal thing is to find middle ground. So things that the conservatives and liberals agree is that our immigration system sucks. We need to fix that for people who are trying to come into the system. That's the middle ground. And now you have camaraderie. Well, sometimes we focus on the wall's great, well, the wall sucks, and then all of a sudden you're betting heads, and now it's like a big dick contest, like who's smarter. And that's not what you want to do. As long as you find middle ground and build that unity within different parties and conversation as well.
Adding on to that, I think when it comes to being on a liberal campus, I would say conservatives, just to do easy numbers, say it's like 90% facts, 10% feelings, and then the liberal side is 90% feelings, 10% facts. If we can meet people in the middle, show empathy, be sympathetic, that's going to help a lot in the long run. And that feeling, I don't know about everyone in the room, but for me personally, I was a left-leaning person not too long ago. I thought Obama was great, hope change, first black president, seemed like a great thing. So that's kind of where my political views were, didn't know much more than that. But once you start discovering these new things, these new videos, Ben Shapiro, PragerU, whatever it is, you kind of open up a rabbit hole. So I would recommend finding your apolitical friends who are rational and willing to listen, and just give them that first red pill, because you don't go back after that. You don't get half red pill, you don't get a quarter red pill. Once it starts, it doesn't stop, and just get them going on it.
Yeah. Well, I want to get a little Jordan Peterson on that question and say, well, I don't really like what you say when you mean the word liberal, because you're assuming that
leftist.
The word liberal, you're assuming it still exists on our campuses. I don't know about that. But the idea of calling it a liberal campus, I'm all for liberal campuses. I think being liberal is a very good thing. I think understanding what that means to be liberal, if we began to know that as a society, maybe we could save ourselves, because we have gone so far away from being a liberal society that actually traditional liberals are now called conservatives and blacks are called white supremacists. This is the kind of country that we live in. So campuses are no longer liberal. They're not about teaching you and opening up your mind. They're not actually progressive about learning what the future holds or how to change things for the better. They're an indoctrination machine, and that, those of you that go here and those of you that might have been wise enough not to have gone. The reality is you got to ask yourself the question. First of all, what's the value of the degree that you're studying? Because if you're in the humanities department and you're like, well, everyone's liberal, that's like going to the engineering department and wondering why it smells like BO. You're jumping into a certain location, and you sound like a whiny brat. Oh, no one here is conservative. No one here likes my ideas. Well, yeah, that's because you're in the English department, okay? This is not a place where they want to talk about politics. They want an agenda, they want a narrative, they want books, they want to go in this direction, and they're already pushing it, and those places might have been lost. But if you're on your college still to learn and to think, don't think in 100, 200 level classes that you're going to get these great debates and structures and change lives. But if you want to make a revolution and you want to get an education, then the best thing you can do on a liberal campus is not try to be Superman. Get an education, which is rare on college campuses today. But I believe in you to do it. College doesn't make people smart. It gives smart people the opportunity to read and study more, to improve on their intelligence that's already inside of them. And so if you're an intelligent person, intelligent people don't try to convince people that they're smart. Good ideas stand the test of time, and truth always wins. So if you have those on your side, then you're on the right side, and you're going to continue to do what's best for this country. I believe in you, and you can survive, and you can thrive.
Woo!
Just the last thing, just to add on top of what Elijah was saying, you don't always have to like own your teacher or own your like classmates in class. If your teacher says something like ridiculous, like you don't, that's not the art, that's like my time to shine. Like you don't have to just like get your grade and like leave. Like, you know, I when I was a college student, that's how I was. You know, a teacher says something wacky, I'm like, all right, that's what you believe. You know, it's like, you know, time for me to leave. You know, I'm gonna graduate. Bye. So you don't always have to, you know, own people, your teachers, whatever in class.
That's all we have for questions. Now I'll open it up to the audience.
All right.
Go ahead.
Okay. I don't mean to be, like I don't want to soak up like a bunch of you guys. Get to it. Just just like a civil little back and forth.
Get to the point.
All right. So I honestly think that like, and I used to be like a right-wing libertarian. I think you guys are actually like just cusping on incredible wokeness. But you guys are just like right there. It's just a little thing. So I was wondering, you guys like have really great ideas about like freedom and like development of like culture and society. But I just want to ask you, I feel like there's like this boogeyman of this word socialism now. I want to ask you, has there ever been a point on that sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and total oppression, enslavement, debt, imperialism, war, has there ever been a point where these things haven't been the driving factor and fuel behind capitalism, and the one thing that keeps the entire system sustained? Has there ever been a point where that hasn't been?
Yeah, right now.
Interesting.
Oh, well, I mean, honestly, if he had just been a little bit more respectful, he was making an incredibly valid point.
Presentation is key.
Yeah, and that's why I, waited. So I was just wondering, so if you may have a response to that,
Yeah, so if you think capitalism is just, functions off of like misogyny and just white supremacy, you're just doing it wrong. And a perfect example is Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is one of my favorite Black icons. He was ex-slave, taught himself how to read, got an education. He read the Constitution, read the Bible, and by his own admission, he understood that the Constitution and the Bible was for the Black man. After that, he utilized capitalism to fund his own publication, the North Star, which Sean King is, researching right now, and I hate it. He used that, the North Star, to build a business, become successful in America, an ex-slave. You would think that it would be hard for an ex-slave to survive in America. So the point is that just because evil people use good institutions doesn't automatically make that institution evil. It just means that those people were evil. So it's like when people say, oh, the Bible is wrong because, there's people in the Bible who had slaves, or there was some guy who raped his sister. And it's like, do you understand what a story is? It's like no one reads The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and thinks that, it's for animal cruelty because Aslan was killed on a slab in the book. He's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. It's called a narrative. It's called a story, and there's meaning to stories. So it's like you can either, the same thing when people say the police was founded to just regulate Black people and throw them in prison. It could be two things to be true at the same time. It could be that the police was founded to regulate crime and to throw bad people in jail. And also in times of immense slavery, there's also racist people who are also police to use that to catch slaves. Those are two different situations that are happening at the same time. Now, one of those things stopped and one of those things is continuing now. So when people say like, oh, capitalism is just, fueled by all these bigoted, misogynistic, yada, 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 you're just convoluting all these ideals and all these situations and not taking the time to actually differentiate them like an intellectual and say, okay, this is what happened. That was the intent. This is what happened. This is actually how capitalism functions.
Very much for this, it's almost like pretty much capitalism you're talking about capitalism, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. It's actually almost like it is a system, but it's like an inanimate object in a way. Like a guitar can be used to make the most beautiful song for God, or it can make the most hardcore black metal for Satan. You could also for a way like a gun. You can protect lives or you can kill somebody. Your question isn't with the system, but the person using the system in a way. So like persons like misogyny, Playboy for damn sure is very sexist, but they volunteer. Also, but if you look at like Black Rabbit Coffee, which is a brand that wants to hire 10,000 refugees and wants to give back to our veterans, and look at Tom's that every pair they sell, they give pairs to someone in like what, Ethiopia or something like that, because they use their good for it. Some companies use their profit or their way for bad, while some people use it for good. So your problem isn't with the system, but the way people use that system.
If I may?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my direct problem from it is that I think that, firstly, just look at the amount of debt that America's in. It's up to $27 trillion now, which means
spending, my guy.
exactly. No, exactly. Because naturally, this is how Karl Marx wrote about it, is that capitalism is inherently unprofitable. Because what happens is that in the long term, can we have some respect here? Can we come down here? I just want to introduce some new ideas. Capitalism is inherently unprofitable in the long haul, because what happens is it's the same thing with the tragedy of the commons theory, is that what makes sense for the individual capitalist hurts the system broadly. So what you have is this tendency, like automation, for example, is putting a lot of people out of work. The thing is that efficiency arises. Our ability to produce goods is so grandly amazing right now. But at the same time, that's hurting the working class. And even though this automation should be liberating them, it's actually condemning them to a life of poverty. So, but workers' wages have been stagnating since, almost immediately after the golden age ended, after World War II, and consumption was up. Okay, so the only way to keep it going is through government spending, which is why we're in $21 trillion. So we keep pumping the economy full of so much money and keep wasting the taxpayer money, which was stolen from the taxpayers, which in turn had the excess profit that they made working, never received the fruits of their labor. The workers had their money stolen and then stolen again by the government. And the government uses their own money to give back to companies, to reinvest back into the economy, to keep the entire unjust and unfair system going. So my beef is with the system, in my opinion, and it's why we need imperialism. It's why we need to steal the resources of third world countries just to keep it going.
Can I say, first of all, thank you for your presentation on this. And I would say, if I wasn't looking, I would have thought by your ideas that you were Tucker Carlson, so maybe you're more conservative. There's no problem. So there's two things here, and I'm really glad you asked that question, because one thing you did is an unnecessary correlation between ideas like imperialism and capitalism, right? And these kinds of negative aspects. Obviously, you're talking about imperialism and these things in a negative way. Okay, but we go even just back to dynastic rulership, right? And emperors, even in Japan, who were major proponents and players in imperialism, right? They absolutely raped and pillaged cultures in South Korea. They invaded China. This was not a capitalistic society, right? This was a different type of economic ladder, and also a different type of political rule. So imperialism and capitalism are not exactly related. Imperialism is a power structure to try to push the limits and the boundaries of your border, often for resources, but sometimes simply because you don't like your neighbors. And so when I look at this and we start to look at capitalism, I actually want to come and say, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, actually. This idea of the government stepping in a free market, in pouring money to try to fix it from falling apart is actually problematic, and I will concede that notion to you. We should not have been trying to bail out these companies and trying to save the economy. Sometimes in a free market, the economy needs to crash so that we learn. It's like when companies say, wow, why aren't millennials using our products? It's not because your products suck, it's because your company sucks at reaching that market, right? And so some companies have to collapse so that other companies can come up. This is a free market. And when the government steps in, I would actually say that is like neo-socialism coming in. That is sort of an authoritarian government that is not, I would say, allotted or prescribed to the authority of our government. And when our government does that, that is against very much the goodwill of the people, and they should stop. So really, I don't think that you're not a conservative. I think you're just not a traditional Republican. But if you look at new wave conservatism, you might open up your eyes, because conservatives are now a group of people who are looking for a small government, looking without this regulation, and letting people decide for their own families, their own homes, and letting the economy defend and fall for itself. And that's what we're fighting for, is a free society, and you sound like you're for that, so you should join us.
Yeah, I mean, they pretty much touched on it. I will add a few things. Would you agree that socialism hasn't historically saved economies. You never see, for example, Venezuela. I'm not going to say Venezuela is socialist. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah,
I know you're
well, I
gonna
wasn't
freak
being ready for that, but I was.
But it's like, why don't they just implement socialism in Venezuela and save Venezuela? Why is every time socialism gets implemented, why is it on a successfully capitalist society? And to take it to the next level really quick, when you're talking about Marxism, you're basically saying that there's a group of oppressors versus a group of those who are oppressed. The gays, the lesbians, the trans, the black, the whatever, the Asian, they're all oppressed. And you're saying it's the white supremacy that's doing that. Or white capitalists that are doing that?
It's the capitalist bourgeoisie class, which also happens to coincide with white people a lot of the time, but there's people who are petit bourgeois. And
so you want the workers to get all of the profits along with the owners of the company of means production, that kind of thing? You want equal distribution of
I believe
profits?
in democracy, and I think that because the thing is that for capitalism to exist, there needs to be a government involved in the first place to protect contracts, to ensure basic law, else people can't exchange. So capitalism and government are intertwined, and the two of them cannot be divorced from one another. And the thing is that this capitalist class will always influence the government, and the government will always influence the capitalist. And because of that evil dichotomy, essentially, it will consistently rely on theft from workers and from us, from taxpayers.
But then, isn't socialism making the government bigger in that
No,
equation?
it's communism. Communism is abolishing the government.
Oh man.
But someone has to represent the workers, right? To discuss the distribution.
It's abolishing the government as it stands. What we're saying is that workers should have democracy. I gotta ask you, we have democracy in every aspect of our lives, except the most important one, which is what we dedicate our lives towards doing. In our lives, in our economic sphere, in our estranged personal being, we are literally slaves to our employers. If you don't work, you starve. There's nothing consensual about that. There's nothing consensual about being taken
You
from.
choose where you want to work.
Socialists don't want the government to expand. They want the government to be abolished because the government is a force that promotes racism and imperialism.
Oh.
So
That's
okay.
socialism.
So there's
Real quick. My final thing will be this. Our system's not perfect. I think capitalism needs a flash of nationalism in there as well, just to kind of keep the jobs at home and not just, for example, NAFTA, going to Mexico, here's all of our jobs, there you go. I will say this, maybe the system's not perfect. There's no better place in the world to move among classes than America. That's just a fact.
But even then, you statistically have a better chance at striking rich from Vegas than you actually do from working hard your entire life.
And compare that
That's
to
been
other countries.
confirmed by
Compare that to
Pew
other
Research.
countries.
That's
Brother, you know what?
at the same time,
in here, man. We live in one of the greatest countries in the world.
Based off imperialism.
Vegas
Based off
is in
stealing
the
from the
U.S. You can't go to Indonesia.
Yes,
and just,
like, there's casinos in Indonesia.
Yeah,
Wait,
but-
what?
So do you think government is inherently bad or inherently good?
I think government is inherently bad.
Okay,
Entirely.
so that's the point.
Bro, all
So-
socialists do.
so-
I know
Government-
Okay,
don't mean
can we move on to
government-
the next question?
yeah.
Because we just have limited time. Sorry about that.
Government is a necessary evil, and whichever form of government you implement depends on how much evil is going to be, put in the people's land. Capitalism right now provides the least amount of evil in society compared to socialism or any other government.
Comes to class mobility, there's no better place than America when it comes to being able to go from low class and poor, nothing to rich. That doesn't exist elsewhere.
Yeah, we can sit here and poke all the bad stuff that's with any forms of government. So.
I agree with that.
I should exchange that
Okay.
expectation, but okay.
Okay.
All right.
You in the corner back there. Yeah, you start.
So I've experienced racism through people saying I'm appropriating their culture. As a non-racist person, how do I respond to that? What did you do? Love.
Yeah.
Shoe dance?
Shoe dance,
No, can you show? Just kidding.
What's the culture you
What's a
appropriated?
shoe dance?
I didn't even know I was appropriating culture, but I was in a dance class and me and my friend started doing it because it was fun. And my friend who is biracial, she said, stop, do you know what race you are? And it kind of struck me because I would never say anything like that to another person. And so for the sake of unity and working as a nation, and nobody's gonna be happy. That's a fact. Not every single person can be happy. There's no such thing as a utopia. But how can, do you guys have any suggestions for ways that we can go about this to
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty easy. So going back to what I said, you can either do two things. You can either just walk away and just ignore it. You know, they have a bias that's unreasonable, or you can turn it on them. You know, it's just like, okay, they point out your race. It's like, wow, that's very racist of you to point out my race. You know, it's
I
like,
did say that.
yeah. So it's like, you know, Dr. King said, why aren't you judging me by the content of my character and not, you know, by the color of my skills, my skin, and my dance skills? You know, so it's turn it on them, show them the hypocrisy, and they will see, even if they scoff at you and walk away. You know, they will see the hypocrisy, and maybe later on they'll think about it. But don't try to go into a huge debate with them. Just point out the hypocrisy, or just don't even bother having a conversation with them. Just walk away.
And do you think there's hope?
There's always hope.
Because I would love to just like exist in a
There's-
society where
there's-
you can just do whatever dance moves you want to do.
There's always hope, and
Like,
it
even
goes.
though I'll admit it's cringy. It's a cringy dance move.
Can I end on a quote from Mike Sir that's really powerful here? And he says this is that haters have the loudest voice, and so they seem the most plentiful. But supporters, they do what? They support you, and they often do it quietly. And so just because there's a few people in our society who are making a loud voice, the famous theologian and philosopher Ricky Gervais recently said, it's not, that it's not that you can't say certain jokes or certain things. It's just that now that you say them, some people are going to be offended. And whether or not you care is up to you. So you can continue to do what you do. Can you stop other people from judging you or doing what they do? No, let them be them and don't let it get to your heart. And the best thing you can do is to strengthen yourself, have thick skin, and live in the real world, which they're not doing.
We can take one more question. I'm not gonna pick it because I don't want to be in charge.
Go.
Same time.
I'll go. So like, I have like a problem in my school because I wouldn't say I'm like the normal people. Like I say I am quite different. And something that bothers me, something that kind of offshoot what he was saying, of like, yeah, in this very capitalist culture, the government does give a lot of power to large corporations and stuff. And me being a person who goes to high school, I have to witness these people every day. It bothers me that there's this intense hypocrisy of, like, even on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I see all these people saying like, oh yeah, I can't believe the ideas of Martin Luther King are dying because of Donald Trump. However, I think they are dying, not because of Donald Trump, but because we see people through their privilege, through their intersectionality. Like, people tell me that, oh, I'm a male and I'm a Hispanic, so then I could only say certain things at certain times. And I think, no, I'm not. I don't want to be defined as a male or Hispanic. I want to be defined by, you know, other things. What makes my character, the music I like, things like that. And what makes me me, not the superficial things I see. And what bothers me is that, yeah, people are saying Martin Luther King's dying, but because it's not because of Donald Trump. It's because we have all these celebrities who think we need to glorify our own races or glorify our own genders. When in reality, I think we need to glorify our characters because, and at the end of the day, it's not like a musician isn't a musician because he's white. No, he's a musician because he has a passion for music. Or a chef is a chef not because he's like Asian or black. It's because they have a passion for cooking. So I think we need to go back to valuing people for truly what they are, other than like these like labels we're giving each other. And another thing that bothers me is how people, you know, in all of the media, people say like, oh yeah, this is like, what, you know, how do I say it without like confusing people?
So what's your question? Sorry, I want to be able to answer your question.
Yeah, what's the question?
How do I like tell people that what they think is true isn't, and how to see the hypocrisy? To see the deep-rooted hypocrisy of what they think. They're saying, oh yeah, Trump is a racist. Obviously, you know, we went over that a lot, but how, you know, everybody has nowadays, everybody has this like God complex. Oh, I need to save the world from racism or sexism. But in reality, I think we're all kind of just okay.
Okay, so you know, the idea of trying to get people to see what they think isn't true, I want to try to answer that in a way that can have an answer, because I don't think there's a direct answer to that. I think that's what a lot of people are trying to figure out, and if we had the answer to that, we'd be a much more cohesive society. I think that the idea of getting people and everyone around you to try to see where they're wrong is one of the ultimate flaws of humanity, which is why whenever you look at politics, or whenever you look at things like education, you've also got to understand the humanity and the soul. And we live in a culture where people are trying to deny the spiritual. They're trying to deny what makes them human. Trying to say, right, we have an entire attack on our society of saying you came from an animal, you're an animal, and you can go to the grave and nothing happened. And so we're going to look at you by the indoctrination that we give you and don't question it because you are just obeying our commands. But for you as a human is to stand up and remind people that they're not just an animal that obeys people, that they are a self-thinking human being with rights that were not given to them, that they were born with, and that they can think how they want to. And when people think how they want to, sometimes there are consequences for when you're not thinking well, and those consequences are good, because it causes you to take a careful look at yourself and to challenge, well, why did I do that? When you go to jail for something, you did something wrong. When you were speeding, like for instance, recently I'll admit this, I didn't know I was speeding down I think it was a 15 towards Las Vegas, and I was going 93 in a 70 zone. Not a good ticket, it's like $600. Don't do it. But ask me how often I have been speeding since then. Not at all. Not only that, because I've been stuck in traffic, but I learned from my mistakes. So with people, I think what it is not trying to get them to see where they're wrong. It's trying to get them to see themselves, to actually look in the mirror for once, to look at the reflection and say, what is it in myself that I can change? And that's the key to a good society, is not trying to control people, not trying to inflict your ideas, but trying to get them to see that absolute truth exists, that it's a moral and a standard and measure that we can all put ourselves against. And when they do that, not only are you empowering people, you're strengthening a nation, and you're going to build strong relationships, and you're going to be seen as a leader rather than a follower, not by demand, not by authority, but because people are going to appreciate your perspective. And so you gain a social standing, you gain respect, and you also get a better country. Why? Because you were selfless, and you love them more than you love yourself. So question your motives. Why are you changing them? Is it for you, or is it for them? And if your heart is for them, then you're in the right place, and you're making a difference.
I think just to piggyback what Elijah's saying, like he's perfectly right. You know, we have to look at ourselves first. We don't always have to try to fix other people. We have to deal with our own selves. And I like to say, people usually think they're the heroes of their own stories, you know, and it's not until you realize that you're the villain that you can do much in society. You know, we are evil people by nature. We're not good people by nature. So when people go around trying to say like, oh, Trump is racist, yada, 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 all that stuff. It's like, well, what have you done? You know, oh, you said grab them by the bleep. Okay, you probably said that with your friends yesterday. You know, what kind of music do you listen to? You know, Jesus said, he without sin cast the first stone. You know, so we have to look within our own selves first and say, who am I? What am I doing as a person? How can I fix myself? Because you can't fix other people. You know, Johnathan said earlier, you can bring a horse down to, you know, a river, but you can't make it drink, you know, unless you like, you know, push it in the river or something like that. But what's going to happen? You know, the horse probably just die and drown. So you have to fix yourself, and you have to build your own character and your own moral standing, and come to grips with yourself and who you are before God, before you can ever even think about trying to deal with someone else.
Can I end on this note? This is a real call to action for us here, and I want us to leave with a takeaway. It's really important. Question your motives of why you're doing all that you're doing. Do you really care about the country? Do you really actually care about the people in the world? Are you prideful? Do you just want your ideas to be seen as true because you want to look good, because you want to gain authority, you want to gain respect? Why are you doing what you're doing? And I think getting people to change, people do change because facts help people change, but this is where the left gets it right, and you were mentioning this. If people don't think you care about them, and I don't mean that, you think you can BS anybody. People know when you don't care about them. And I think you can answer yourself, do you really care about the people that disagree with you? Or are you just trying to convert them and change them to your side? Are you just trying to get them to believe what you believe? Because you might actually be the one that's ignorant and needs to change it. And so the reality of the matter is when you sit there, when you look at yourself, you got to ask in every single situation, why am I doing what I'm doing? And if you can say it's genuinely out of the love for people, the love for your country, or the love for God, whatever it is that drives you and motivates you and is for good, then you're on a good course. But I think this country would be a lot better if people were less concerned about pushing their narratives because they want to be right than they were about wanting to be right so that they can help someone else get ahead. And if your ideas are to advance other people and to empower them and to give them that freedom, that liberty, whether you're coming from a completely socialist or communist, I know exactly where you stand, somewhere in there. You seem like you're a little bit, you don't know where you stand yet either. Mr. Thompson. You know, or you are a far right person, ask yourself that question. Why? And if the motive is pure, then you'll probably have a pure result. And I'm going to tell you what, there are some left-wing ideas that are good, and there are some that are very bad. And there are some right-wing ideas that are good, and there are some that are also very bad. And if you can't see that, and you realize that a person is not defined by their ideas, that the value comes from who they are as a human being, then you're missing the point. And love needs to be at the core of everything you do, and this country will be great again.
That's all the time we have for today, but I want to thank all you guys for showing up, and thank you to our speakers. And yeah, we'll have a couple more events